Apollo 13 wasn't just a space movie, it was a survival story, one that actually happened. Directed by Ron Howard and starring Tom Hanks, it captured the terrifying real-life mission that almost ended in tragedy when 3 astronauts were stranded 200,000 miles from Earth. But behind the gripping realism and emotional performances are some truly weird, fascinating, and almost unbelievable facts. From NASA's secret involvement to bizarre accidents on set, this film story is almost as wild as the real Apollo 13 mission itself. So buckle up, because here are 20 weird facts about Apollo 13, 1995, that you probably didn't know. Fact 1. NASA actually helped build the movie. Unlike most space films, Apollo 13 had NASA's full cooperation. The agency opened its doors to Ron Howard, giving him access to mission logs, real equipment, and even astronaut training footage. The production team spent days studying inside the actual Apollo command module. NASA's engineers even gave them original blueprints to rebuild everything exactly as it was in 1970. Ron Howard said the film was so accurate that retired astronauts visiting the set felt like they were back in space. One NASA official even joked, "This is the closest thing we've had to a real mission since Apollo 17. Fact 2. The weightless scenes were shot in real zero gravity. Most filmmakers would fake zero gravity with wires. Not Ron Howard. The crew used NASA's KC-135 Vomit Comet, an aircraft that creates real weightlessness by flying in parabolic arcs. The cast and crew did over 600 parabolas. That's more than 4 hours of total zero-gravity time. Every 25-second arc let them film one floating shot before gravity came back. Tom Hanks called it the most fun nausea I've ever had. The downside? Everyone, including the camera operators, got sick. Buckets were always kept just off camera. The end result was so realistic that astronauts later said it captured zero gravity better than any other movie ever made. Fact 3. Tom Hanks was obsessed with getting it right. Tom Hanks wasn't content to just play astronaut Jim Lovell. He wanted to become him. He studied real NASA training videos, learned how to operate spacecraft switches, and even spent time in simulators. During breaks, Hanks could actually explain the ship's navigation systems to visitors. The real Jim Lovell visited the set and said, "If I ever need to go back up, I'm taking Tom with me." Hanks even practiced Lovell's hand gestures, breathing rhythm, and calm tone under stress. His obsession with authenticity is part of why audiences believed every second of his performance. He didn't act like an astronaut. He felt like one. Fact 4. Kevin Bacon's role was almost given to another actor. Kevin Bacon, who played astronaut Jack Swigert, wasn't the studio's first choice. Initially, Gary Sinise, who ended up playing Ken Mattingly, was offered the role. But Ron Howard switched the casting after realizing Sinise fit better as the grounded astronaut helping from Earth. Kevin Bacon joined late in production, had only 2 weeks to prepare, and still nailed the role. Ironically, that chaos mirrored Swigert's real experience. He joined the Apollo 13 crew just 2 days before launch. The casting change made the movie accidentally more authentic than anyone expected. Fact 5. The crew's chemistry came from real training. Ron Howard didn't want his actors to just memorize lines. He wanted them to bond, like a real space crew. So he sent Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton to actual NASA training at the Johnson Space Center. They learned to move in zero gravity, communicate like astronauts, and even spent nights inside a command module mock-up. The actors were told they could only speak using NASA's radio codes and terminology. After a week, they were finishing each other's sentences. By the time filming started, their teamwork was so natural that Ron Howard said they stopped being actors. They became Astronaut 6. The launch sequence used a real rocket. When Apollo 13 shows that breathtaking rocket launch, that's not CGI. Ron Howard actually used real NASA footage of a Saturn V rocket liftoff, mixed seamlessly with shots of his actors inside the spacecraft. The real footage came from the Apollo 8 and Apollo 11 missions. The editing team spent months color matching and digitally cleaning the film to make it look freshly shot. They even recreated the vibration effects and camera shakes that occurred during real launches. The sound of the engines you hear? it's actual audio from the NASA archives. The combination was so powerful that audiences in theaters said they could feel the rumble in their seats. Even astronauts admitted it gave them flashbacks. Fact 7. The actors weren't acting when they looked exhausted. During the scenes where the crew is tired, freezing, and losing hope, the actors weren't pretending. The set was kept just above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, about 4 degrees Celsius, to match the freezing temperature inside the real spacecraft. Ron Howard wanted to see their breath fog up naturally, and he didn't want makeup sweat or fake shivers. By the end of each shooting day, Tom Hanks, Bill Paxton, and Kevin Bacon were genuinely worn out. Their exhaustion added an authentic layer of realism to every frame. Paxton later said, "We didn't have to imagine the cold. We lived it." That's why those quiet, hopeless scenes hit so hard. They weren't staged emotions. They were real reactions to real discomfort. Fact 8. The real astronauts visited the set and corrected everything. Ron Howard invited the actual Apollo 13 crew, Jim Lovell and Fred Haise, to the set multiple times. They didn't just observe, they actively corrected details during filming. At one point, Lovell stopped a scene and said, "That checklist should be flipped the other way." Instead of feeling annoyed, Hanks thanked him and restarted the take. The crew also advised the sound designers on what radio chatter really sounded like during emergencies. The final film became so close to reality that NASA later used clips from Apollo 13 during training sessions to show how communication breakdowns could escalate. Imagine that, a Hollywood movie being used to train astronauts. Fact 9. Bill Paxton got pneumonia. Midway through filming, when the characters start showing signs of sickness in the movie, that wasn't acting either. Bill Paxton, who played Fred Haise, actually got pneumonia during filming. The irony? His real-life counterpart, the actual Fred Haise, also developed an infection during the Apollo 13 mission. The production decided not to delay filming. Instead, Ron Howard used Paxton's illness to make the scenes more believable. His pale face, raspy breathing, and low energy were all genuine. Paxton later joked, "I didn't need method acting. I had the real thing." That coincidence between reality and fiction gave those mid-mission scenes a haunting, almost documentary-level intensity. Fact 10. The explosion scene nearly went wrong. When the oxygen tank explodes in the movie, that tense, heart-stopping moment, it was filmed using a massive practical effect. The set was rigged with real pressurized gas canisters, strobe lights, and shaking rigs to mimic the sudden blast. The first test went perfectly, but during an actual take, one of the pressure lines came loose, sending metal parts flying across the set. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the scare was so real that Ron Howard halted production for 2 days to rebuild the rig. He later said, "We didn't just recreate disaster. For a second, we almost had one." That's how committed they were to realism. They were willing to risk chaos to make it look authentic. And here's where it gets wild, because the next 10 facts dive into on-set disasters, eerie coincidences, hidden symbolism, and even how the real Jim Lovell secretly appears in the movie. If you think you've seen everything, trust me, the next coming facts will blow your mind. Fact 11. Tom Hanks became so obsessed he could actually fly the module. Tom Hanks didn't just act like an astronaut, he trained like one. He spent weeks inside NASA simulators learning every switch, knob, and lever in the command module. By the end of his training, he could actually run through full launch and re-entry sequences from memory. NASA instructors later said he could have passed a basic simulator test if he were a real astronaut. During filming, he even improvised lines using real technical jargon, surprising everyone on set. When you see him flipping switches or reading data, he's doing it exactly how the real Jim Lovell did. That dedication made Hanks one of NASA's favorite actors, and they even invited him to fly in a real KC-135 Vomit Comet to experience zero gravity. Fact 12. They actually shot in zero gravity. That's right, Apollo 13 was the first major Hollywood movie ever filmed in real zero gravity. The actors and crew boarded NASA's KC-135 aircraft, which climbs and dives through parabolic arcs, creating about 25 seconds of true weightlessness at a time. Each short zero-G window was enough for just a few seconds of usable footage. To capture all the floating scenes, Ron Howard had to repeat the process more than 600 times. That's around 4 hours of zero gravity total. The cast joked that they spent so much time floating, they could walk on ceilings in their sleep. Many crew members got sick mid-air, hence the nickname Vomit Comet. But the result? Completely realistic weightlessness, unlike any movie before it. Fact 13. The real Jim Lovell has a cameo. You probably missed. Most fans don't realize this, but the real astronaut Jim Lovell appears in Apollo 13. He plays the Navy captain who greets Tom Hanks's character at the end of the film when the crew is rescued. The uniform Lovell wears in that scene is his actual Navy dress uniform, the same one he wore in real life decades earlier. He even salutes himself in a weird cinematic loop between history and fiction. Ron Howard said it was his way of honoring Lovell and giving him the ending he truly deserved. Many audience members didn't notice at first. They were too busy crying during that emotional finale. Fact 14. NASA initially said no to the film. When Ron Howard first approached NASA for cooperation, the agency was hesitant. They didn't want Hollywood to dramatize or exaggerate a near disaster in space. NASA had just begun rebuilding its public image after the Challenger tragedy. But when Howard promised total historical accuracy and brought in astronaut consultants, NASA agreed. They gave the crew full access to training facilities, real spacecraft blueprints, and mission audio. It became one of the rare times NASA fully collaborated with a film production. In the end, the movie not only boosted their image, it actually increased public support for space exploration again. Fact 15. The actors were attached to hidden suspension wires. Not every floating moment could be done in zero gravity. For the rest, the production used an elaborate system of thin wires connected to the actors' harnesses. These wires were controlled by hidden pulleys, making the actors move smoothly, as if weightless. It took 3 months of choreography and practice to perfect. The wires were later digitally erased frame by frame. Remember, this was 1995, so it wasn't easy. Visual effects teams used early computer software to clean up hundreds of shots, 1 pixel at a time. The effort paid off. Critics still say Apollo 13 has some of the most convincing zero-G effects ever captured on film, even by modern standards. Fact 16. The crew's fear wasn't always acting. During one of the early takes in the zero-gravity plane, the hydraulics malfunctioned mid-flight. For a few terrifying moments, the plane lost balance, causing real panic among the cast. Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton were strapped inside the Mach Command module when the plane suddenly dipped harder than expected. The actors' faces of shock in that sequence weren't rehearsed. It was genuine fear. The crew decided to keep some of that raw footage because it perfectly captured the chaos and uncertainty of being in space. Later, Hanks admitted it was the only time he truly felt like he might not make it back down. Fact 17. Ron Howard refused to use a traditional soundtrack. Most Hollywood blockbusters rely on sweeping orchestral music to guide the audience's emotions. But Ron Howard took a bold risk. For large parts of Apollo 13, he muted the score completely, letting the silence of space and the steady hum of machinery build tension. When music does appear, it's often soft, emotional, and delayed. Composer James Horner said Howard's direction forced him to compose silence, designing moments where sound itself became a heartbeat. This subtle technique made the tension unbearable. Audiences felt trapped with the astronauts. Even critics said the film's quiet moments were some of the loudest in movie history. Fact 18. The actors' breath was real inside their helmets. Most movie space helmets are fake, fog-free and ventilated by fans. But for Apollo 13, the production used sealed helmets modeled after NASA's real gear. They were so airtight that the actors' breath would fog the visors during long takes. Instead of fixing it, Ron Howard loved how authentic it looked and kept it in the final cut. You can spot it in several close-up shots. Tom Hanks's or Bill Paxton's faces blurred behind a misty visor, giving the sense of panic and exhaustion. The only downside? The helmets got so hot under the lights that makeup artists had to constantly cool them with air hoses between takes. Fact 19. Houston, we have a problem. Was slightly changed. Everyone knows the iconic line, but the real phrase spoken during the Apollo 13 mission was, Houston, we've had a problem. The movie changed it to the present tense, we have a problem, to make it more dramatic and immediate. Ron Howard debated this change for weeks, worried about upsetting NASA historians. But even Jim Lovell himself approved it, saying it captured the urgency of the moment better for a movie audience. The line went on to become one of the most famous in cinema, used in everything from comedy sketches to documentaries. Today, even NASA admits the movie version sounds better than the real one. Fact 20. The film was almost too real for the families of the crew. When the movie was first screened for the real Apollo 13 astronauts and their families, the emotional impact was overwhelming. Marilyn Lovell, Jim Lovell's wife, had to leave the theater during one of the tense re-entry scenes because it brought back all the fear she had lived through in 1970. Other family members said they felt like they were reliving the event. One of the NASA engineers in the audience reportedly cried, saying it was like going back into the control room. Ron Howard later admitted that this reaction was both heartbreaking and validating, because it proved that the film captured the human side of the mission, not just the science. And that wraps up our deep dive into Apollo 13, 1995. 20 weird facts you didn't know. This wasn't just a space movie. It was a story of survival, teamwork, and human spirit, recreated with jaw-dropping realism. Every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat was grounded in truth. If you enjoyed discovering the secrets behind this masterpiece, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because the next video dives into another classic that pushed Hollywood to its limits.